The Wright Brothers: Frontiers in History by Jacob Mastriani. The Wright brothers began one of the most successful frontiers in history by showing off their engineering prowess and inventing the first ever flying machine. Taking on a field of study that was completely undeveloped, the Wright brothers did it. They created the first powered flying machine. This year's National History Day theme is Frontiers in History. When you think of frontiers or undeveloped fields of studies in the past, what comes to mind? Maybe cell phones, robots? But one huge frontier that you may take for granted is flight. Before 1903, no one had ever flown a plane. When I think of frontiers in history, what the Wright brothers pulled off certainly comes to mind. I mean, what field of study was more undeveloped at the time than flight? And from an early age, the Wright brothers had the idea in mind. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, both brothers were religious, and their dad, Milton Wright, was a minister at a local church. Both boys shared a love for a particular toy that worked like a helicopter, but was powered by a rubber band which spun the blades. This probably sparked their love for aviation and led to the invention of the flying machine. Before the Wright brothers were into aviation, they owned a bicycle shop in Ohio. They ended up using the bicycle shop to begin their studies on aviation. This may seem like an unimportant step in the Wright brothers' life, but it gave them financial stability to achieve their true passion. The Wright brothers greatly impacted the entire idea of flight. In the past, things such as gliders were a thing, but the Wright brothers had different ideas on flight. They wanted to add power to something like a glider and achieve what no one had ever done before: fly in a powered flying machine. When you think about flying, it may just go over your head as a convenient way to travel. But what the Wright brothers created would not only go on to change the world forever. Could you imagine the difference in the military? Not only would the military be different, but the shipping process of basic goods would be completely different as well. One thing admirable about the Wright brothers is how confident they were about the idea of flight. Even from a young age, they were very confident in the idea of flight. Wilbur Wright even sent this letter to the Smithsonian: "I have been very interested in the problem of mechanical and human flight ever since, as a boy, I constructed a number of boats of various sizes after the style of Cayley's and Pennode's machines. My observations since have only convinced me more firmly that human flight is possible and practical." This quote by Wilbur Wright is a perfect example of how confident the Wright brothers were that they could develop this frontier. While on the verge of completing their invention and establishing one of the greatest frontiers in history, the Wright brothers didn't have an easy road. Not only did a Frenchman try to steal credit for the first flight, many people didn't believe the Wright brothers. A segment of this letter from E.W. Ellis says this: "The French have erected a monument just outside Paris, with an inscription saying that on January 13th, 1908, a French flyer, for the first time in the world, made a circle of 1 kilometer with a machine heavier than air, thus trying to rob the Wright brothers of the glory that belongs to them and to them alone." This quote shows that the French tried to take credit for the Wright brothers' incredible achievement. In 1867, Wilbur Wright was born. Just a few years later, in 1871, Orville Wright was born. If you go ahead and skip ahead to 1892, you'll see that the Wright brothers opened their first bicycle shop. And then just 11 years later, the Wright brothers achieved flight for the first time. They would then go on to name the plane Wright Flyer 1. In 1908, the brothers sold the plane to the U.S. Army. Sadly, just 4 years later, Wilbur dies in his bed. After carrying on his and his brother's legacy, Orville Wright dies of an unexpected heart attack. As you can see, the Wright brothers not only pulled off one of the most impressive feats of all time, they also pioneered one of the greatest frontiers of history.